Chief Justice Joseph Broderick from the Supreme Court to be here. 15 years in the Supreme Court, 6 years as the Chief Justice, and probably a lifetime of being involved with the public and public service and stuff, and a long list of being an attorney and many different accomplishments. Most importantly and most recently is the co-chair for the Change Direction New Hampshire. And so with that, I don't want to ruin anything that he has. I'll turn it over to the Chief Justice, and thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I must be getting older because the chief looks so young to me.
Peter, he's okay. He's leaving.
In any event, it's a wet, rainy night. Thank you for coming out. I'm working at Gardner Hitch right now, so it's kind of on my way home. But happy to be here. And I was glad the chief invited me to come. I've had some phenomenal opportunities in my lifetime, not the least of which was being Chief Justice of our state Supreme Court. And it was a great responsibility and a great honor. But this campaign, what brings me here tonight, is the most important thing I have ever done in my professional life, and I mean that sincerely. Since last May, when this campaign was launched, Peggy would know, my assistant, but I think I've spoken 124 or 125 times in the last 12 months, all over the state. And what's most remarkable about that is that I didn't invite myself anywhere. So it's not about me, it's about the need for this campaign. And so we need to change the culture around mental illness in the United States. And we need to get about it, because a lot of people are depending on it. When I was a young kid, I grew up north of Boston. Sorry about that, but that's where I grew up. I grew up about 10 or 12 miles north of Boston in a pretty middle class but leafy town. My father was a high school chemistry teacher, one of those really smart people. And I had a great neighborhood, and my best friend lived across the street from me when I was 10 years old, and his father was a graduate of MIT, which in my neighborhood is rock star status. I never met anyone from MIT. And his father's brother, or my friend's uncle, was an inpatient at the Danvers Mental Hospital in Danvers, Massachusetts. In my childhood, by the way, every adult and every child referred to that place as the nut house. That's what they call it. They weren't ashamed to say it. None of us were ashamed to say it. I look back all these years later and I think, how wrong was that? How unfair was that to the people confined and treated at Danvers and to their families? But that's what we call it. And on Sundays in the summer, my friend's father would often pick his brother up at Danvers, wherever that was. And he would bring him to my neighborhood, and they would bring him for a cookout. And so I would watch him from the safety of my front yard. That's how I saw it. And he never said anything to me or gestured toward me, but I was very frightened of him. He was, after all, in a mental institution. And he looked pretty harmless from where I was standing, but I knew he couldn't be, or thought he couldn't be. And sometimes I'd see him walking around with his brother, sometimes by himself, looking at the flowers by the side of the garage. And on those days, I never crossed the street to play with my friend, never. I wouldn't have had enough courage to do that. And when he finally left at the end of the day, I was relieved. I was relieved that he had left my neighborhood. And I knew as a kid that I would never see someone like that ever again, or know anyone like that in my lifetime. So it was a one-off experience, as frightening as it was. And then some decades later, in a different town, namely Manchester, in a different state, New Hampshire, and on a different street, mental illness from my childhood crossed that road and took up residence in my own house. Undetected, disguised, unseen, but there. I have two sons. At the time they were 13 and 11. And they were great kids. They had a pretty good childhood, I think. They had great friends, we lived in a great neighborhood. And pretty good growing up. But mental illness took up residence in my 13-year-old son, and he didn't know it, by the way, which is very common. Why would he know it? It's just how he is. He'd know he had a health issue. At that time, nobody talked about mental health. Nobody talked about it. And so I wouldn't have known what it looked like. Certainly would never have found it in a child. I'm not even sure I thought it was possible in a child back then. And if you had mentioned to me back then that my son might have a mental health problem, I probably would have been offended that you said that. Or I would think, well, how could my son have a mental health problem? Why couldn't my son have a mental health problem? I didn't know that then. And so my son, who was pretty smart, never quite seemed to achieve all he could have in school. Some of the teachers would say he's running on 2 cylinders, but he was smart. He drew, he was a very good artist, and so he spent a lot of time as a child, young teenager, drawing in his room, which today I would describe as withdrawing, but back then I didn't. You know, people say artists are different, they march to the beat of a different drum, and it's probably true. He graduated from the 8th grade at a junior high school in Manchester. He announced that he didn't want to go to his graduation, which at the time I didn't think was as odd as I would now. But back then I thought, well, he has friends who didn't go to that school. It's a Saturday, he wants to be with his friends. So he's just being selfish, but he went to his graduation, but he didn't want to go. He started smoking in high school. I didn't know that. He drew more in high school, but now he had friends who really loved his artwork. He had fewer friends than his brother. He still had friends, but he wasn't as external as his brother was. He got through high school, did okay, not great, not as well as he could have done. Yeah, but he got into a pretty good college in New York, and so off he went to New York. And when he went to New York, sometimes you hear rumors that when kids go to college, they drink. Have you heard those rumors? I think they could be true. And so my son, who grew up in a household where no one drank, because we just didn't like the taste of alcohol, my son was majoring in drinking, apparently, for his first year. But we didn't see him every day. His friends would say to us when we'd be down to visit that they were concerned about him. He would deny he had a problem. I didn't see it in that way. You know, kind of disheveled, but college kids aren't wearing suits. So I accepted that. And he continued to drink in college. He did okay, not great. And then he got out of college and went to graduate school in Boston. For a while he lived with us, and then he lived in Boston, right outside of Boston. And by that point he couldn't disguise his drinking. He was drinking every day. And it was pretty alarming, but he was then an adult. Not much you can do about it. He would deny that he had a drinking problem, even though it was obvious he had a drinking problem. He graduated from graduate school, got his first job, couldn't hold it. Had that job for a couple of weeks, and it was someone else's fault that he couldn't stay there. Then he got another job. He held that job for 4 days or so, and then he couldn't work. My wife and I, went to see the alcohol experts and tried to get some sense of what was happening with his other, my other son. His brother was fine, totally fine. Went on to get his master's degree in Connecticut, he was fine. But my oldest son wasn't. We couldn't figure it out other than what seemed obvious to us. So we saw the alcohol people, and they said, your son is an alcoholic. That's the problem. So here are your choices. You can put him on the street, hope he hits bottom, actually said that, and comes back, as we would hope. Or your other choice is to leave him in your house, and he will die drinking in your house. Not next week, not next month, maybe not even next year, but eventually, the amount of alcohol he's consuming, he's going to die in your house. So, not wanting to have to make that decision, and if you knew my wife, my wife is an amazingly generous, kind, loving, she really is. She would give you her last $50 if she thought it would help you, if she just met you. That's who she is. And so I mentioned that to you because she and I were the decision tree on what to do with our son, who we loved so much. And so we finally persuaded him that he should go to rehab, even though he wasn't an alcoholic, he told us. He was kind of offended that we thought he should go to rehab, but it was better than putting him on the street or letting him die drinking in the house, something. And so he went, and then he kind of majored in rehab. He went to rehab in New Hampshire. It didn't work. Then he went to rehab in Connecticut, and that didn't work. And then he went to rehab in Florida. He was gone for many weeks. And when I picked him up at the airport, he was drinking, so I hadn't taken him. But thank goodness he said, I don't have an alcohol problem. And he's a good person. But I didn't understand it, and no one up to that time had ever said anything about mental illness. Nothing. No teacher, no doctor, no one. No family member, no friends. The alcohol expert said he's an alcoholic. So finally my wife and I decided to put my son out. I was on the Supreme Court at the time, and it was the hardest thing we ever did. And it was the worst thing we ever could have done, but I didn't know it then. And so we put my son out, and he was on the street, literally on the street. And he had a car, which was dangerous, I suppose, but I didn't have a key. So he slept sometimes in his car, sometimes he slept at the shelter in Manchester, my master's educated son. And he continued to drink. And we were scared to death that something would happen. And we also thought we must be the worst parents in New Hampshire, because how could this be happening? How have we failed him? In some way we failed him. Obviously, we can't even figure it out now. And there was no quick fix to it. I've been a lawyer and a judge at that point my whole life, and so I solved problems. That's what I was paid to do. And now I have the most important problem of my life, and I can't fix it. And I drive from Manchester to Concord every day. That's where the Supreme Court is. And all day long I think, am I going to get that call today that every parent lives in fear of? And finally, after about 3 or 4 weeks, my wife and I said, we can't do this anymore. We just can't do it. And so we brought him home. And when we put him on the street, his underlying mental illness exploded. I didn't know he had an underlying mental illness, and he didn't need it. And so when he came home, he continued to drink just as he had when we put him out. And I believe that he was so frightened, since his behavior hadn't changed, that we'd put him out again. And I think that time on the street like that was traumatic for him. And he was frightened, I believe, that we might do that to him again, put him out. And so one night he assaulted me, my master's educated son. I went to the intensive care unit at the Elliott Hospital. My son went to the Valley Street Jail. Now, I wasn't aware that I was in the hospital. I wasn't aware anyone took me to the hospital. I was in the intensive care unit for about 7 days, which I remember nothing. My wife sadly remembers all of it. And so she would come to the hospital, and I didn't know where I was. I didn't know I was in the hospital. And so I wasn't really with the program. And then she would visit my son, my master's educated son, in his orange jumpsuit at the Valley Street Jail. And the first time she went, they talked on the phone, it was plexiglass. And she said he was so upset. And he said, Mom, I can't believe I did that to Dad. I could never forgive myself. Is he okay? Is he going to be okay? Well, she didn't really know. And then she'd come to the hospital and talk to people, friends who came to visit that night. And then she'd leave, and there'd be satellite dish trucks outside, because it was big news apparently. And she didn't lock the front door, she went out the side door and go home. There'd be 20 messages on the answering machine that she would delete because she couldn't call them and wouldn't have known what to say if she did. While I was in intensive care, my doctors went on the Today Show. So wasn't exactly below the radar. He was in the Los Angeles Times and New York Times. He was a man by the dog store. I didn't know that at the time. And my son was at Valley Street. And if your father's on the state Supreme Court and you're at Valley Street, that's probably not a good thing. But I couldn't worry about it then, I didn't know it then. And my wife couldn't visit every day, they wouldn't allow that. So he said to her one day, I said, Mom, if you can, I can see the cemetery from my window. And on days when you can't visit, if you were able to go there at 3 in the afternoon, at least I could see you. I know my family hadn't abandoned me. And so my wife, who's a pretty courageous person, would get in her car, drive there, get out, stand on the corner at 3 o'clock and wave at the building and do a thumbs up, not even knowing what window he was in. She said to me later, it was a good distance away because he couldn't see me crying from there. I didn't know that. After 7 days, they brought me upstairs to my private room. And as I say to people when I speak, just a suggestion, when you visit people in the hospital, don't tell them you like their room, okay? Just a thought. Just, I love your room. Or people say, I love the view. I couldn't get out of bed, okay? I didn't care what they saw. Just a thought, you might keep in mind. Anyway, I was up there for 2 days. I had asked the doctor that first day why I was in the hospital. And he said, I think you fell, which at the time made sense, but I didn't remember falling. And I felt pretty banged up for someone who had fallen. And so 2 days in my private room, my wife came in, we were alone, and she told me, especially knew what had happened. And the two of us just cried. I'd been a professional lawyer and judge for my whole life, and so I knew what that meant. I couldn't understand it. But my master's educated son in the Valley Street jail, charged with a crime. I couldn't even get out of bed, so I felt so helpless. I couldn't help my wife. When I got out of the hospital, I was there probably 3 weeks, seemed like 3 years. And I wasn't allowed to visit my son. They wouldn't let me visit at the Valley Street jail. But my wife did. Every week she was down there, probably on a lot of street corners, I didn't know. And then my son was sentenced in Hillsborough County Superior Court in Manchester, sentenced to the state prison, my master's educated son. It was the only time in my life that I was happy my parents weren't alive, because it would have killed them. And I was on the court then, and so they were pressed there. Yeah, I understood it. And my son came in that day, the day of the sentencing, and I was behind the rail, and I stood up, and he had civilian clothing on. Last time I'd seen that for a long time. And he came over to me, gave me the biggest hug. And he said, Dad, are you okay? I am so sorry. Are you going to be okay? And I said, yeah, I think so. Didn't understand that. And I said to him, we must have gotten into this as a family, and we're going to get out of it as a family too. If you don't quit, your mother and I won't quit. He said, I won't quit that. And then he was sentenced to 3 years in the state prison. The last time I'd been in that courtroom, that very courtroom in the basement, I was trying a case years earlier, and I got a call from my mother middle of the day, and she said, your dad's been mismedicated. They live on Cape Cod. At the end of the day, could you drive down? Because they're going to take Dad to the hospital. He seemed very confused, which was not like my father. So I finished the trial. It was over. I drove to the Cape, went to the Cape Cod Hospital, talked to my dad, who seemed very much with the program. They were going to keep him overnight, and he died at midnight. That courtroom had all those memories, and I did not want to go back there. And now I'm back in the same room to watch my son be sentenced to the state prison. It seemed pretty cruel to me at the time. And so when my son went to Concord, they don't let you have any visitors for 2 months. That's true for all inmates. And when we drove home that day, hearing my son's sentence, the judge let us meet as a family for 10 minutes before he was taken away. It seemed so surreal where he was going. And I wanted to say, get your coat, come on, we'll go home. I don't know what's going on here. But he went to Concord. And after 60 days, we went up and we met with him in the secure psychiatric unit of the state prison. He wasn't housed in the secure psychiatric unit, but that's what it means, in place. And if you haven't been to the secure psychiatric unit at the state prison, it's a pretty sad place. A lot of steel on steel sounds, a lot of linoleum, kind of an antiseptic place. But that's where we met. So we met with the head psychiatrist, two social workers, my wife and I, and my son, who had to approve of it. He's an adult. So we sat down, and the psychiatrist, Dr. Knowles, I can never thank that man enough. He said to me, let me tell you what's going on with your son, Judge. Picture where we are. He said, your son has serious depression, and he has anxiety and panic attacks that are really almost off the charts. And he was self-medicating with alcohol. No one had ever said self-medicating. The alcohol people never said self-medicating. It's hard to believe now. And when he said that, I thought, how stupid was I? I thought I failed him. I didn't see it. He has a mental health problem. He didn't know it. But I should have. Shouldn't I? I mean, that's what I thought. And he said to us, your son has all the skills you need to be very successful in life. And we're going to try to work with him and see if we can help him. I wasn't confident anything would change. And my wife and I that day, it's a long driveway, goes up a hill behind the secure psychiatric unit, and we walked up there that day, and we didn't say too much. But we knew that we had failed him. And it was a horrible day. And it seemed hopeless to us. Anyway, about 6 or 8 weeks later, we would visit once a week. And by the way, a third of the cases, a third of the appeals I was hearing on the state Supreme Court come from incarcerated inmates. So it's like my docket in the state prison. So to go in there was kind of an odd feeling, but mostly my son was living there. I said to him one night, if you are really frightened or if it gets bad here, I'll resign my job. I don't want your safety to depend on my day job. I'll get another job. Now, my father had said that. I would have said, why don't you do it tonight? Let's announce it here at the prison. He never did. He said, Dad, don't do that. If it gets really bad, I'll let you know, but don't do that. He never asked. After about 8 weeks, we went one night and he came out and gave us both a big hug and he said, Dad, I feel so different. He said, I feel so different. I can sleep, I can focus. I haven't felt like this since I was a child. Now, mind you, he hasn't been drinking, he's in prison. I said, what's happening? He said, I know, Dad, they've given me 3 pills a day and I take a pill at bedtime. Wow, so I haven't felt like this for years. And he was like that for the balance of his time in prison. He was married in the prison. So if you're doing wedding planning, I wouldn't be my first choice. But that's where he was married, and I performed the wedding in a conference room off the main visiting room during visiting hours, which meant I had a great view of the Coke machine, and it was really inspiring. As weird as it sounds, that was such a wonderful day. It's hard to describe it. It was in the saddest place you could be, but somehow it seemed hopeful. And my son's wife had gotten her master's degree with him, and several years later, she won an Emmy for her work on film and film editing in New England. She was twice nominated. She actually won the Emmy. I've held the Emmy. She won't let me keep it, but I've held it. Pretty impressive. And they have an 8-year-old daughter. And when I go around and I speak, I say, look, I'm the grandparent, so I'm totally objective. But even if I weren't totally, she's beautiful. She's a child model, is what she's beautiful. She's as sweet as she's beautiful. And every time I hug that little girl, I think, you're a miracle. You're a miracle. When my son was released from prison, a little early, on said, "My Linda, it'd be like me being in prison at some point." He was feeling well, he was doing well, he was teaching. When he was released, they sent up a camera crew from Channel 9, and I was then the Chief Justice, and they put a microphone under my chin, and they said, "Do you have any comments you'd like to make, Judge?" I said, "Actually, I do." I said, "First of all, we're really excited my son's coming home. And I want you to know my son's not a bad person, he's now a good person. He's always been a good person, he's now well. And those are very different things, and they are, by the way." That first Thanksgiving, when we were driving to pick something up at the grocery store, he said to me, "Dad," he said, "have you always felt like this?" I said, "What do you mean like this?" He said, "Good, I mean, like I feel." And I said, "Probably." But I mean, it made us feel like we should have known, we should have seen it, we shouldn't have been letting it happen. He said to me, "Dad," he said, "they gave me an IQ test in the prison." I knew he was smart, smarter than I am. So I said, "How did you do?" He said, "I was 3 points below genius, Dad, on the IQ test." So I was kidding him. I said, "So you couldn't be a genius?" He said, "Dad, my ankles were shackled. They were watching me through a two-way mirror. That's got to be worth 3 points." I said, "Okay, you're a genius." I think he is, by the way. He's frighteningly smart. So why am I here? That story, which I've told you, elapsed over a long time, over years it took. And I went back to court, back to the Supreme Court after about 4 months, 5 months, and I never talked about it. Almost like nobody knew that happened, nobody's read anything. That's the world I grew up in. And nobody really talked to me about it, because what would they say? Nobody knew what to say. So most people said nothing. And that's how it would probably be to this day, and I'd never be here. This is the last place I would ever be, talking about the last thing I would ever talk about. But now it's the most important thing I do. A year ago, September, I got a call from Dr. Bill Gunn, G-U-N-N. He's a psychologist, he's the head of behavioral health at Concord Hospital. He said, "John, I have a good friend, a woman, her name is Barbara Van Dalen. She's a child psychologist in Maryland. She has offices in Washington, D.C. She wants to launch a statewide mental health awareness campaign. And she asked me, Bill Gunn, if I would chair it. And I told her," he said, "that I'd be happy to do it, but I can't do it by myself. I don't know enough people, but I know a guy who knows more people than I know, and his family's been through the ringer, and he might want to get involved." So I said, "Sure, I'll call her, Bill." So I Googled her, right? We all do that. Oh, come on, we all Google. We know it's true. And so I Googled her, and I found out that she had been on Time Magazine's 100 list 3 years earlier. The 100 most influential people on the planet Earth. That was pretty intimidating. Now I just want to call her up. I wish I hadn't Googled her. So I called her. And I said, "Barbara, you were on the Time Magazine 100 list 3 years ago." She was very apologetic almost. She said, "No, I know I was." And I said, "Barbara, who knew? You and I have so much in common." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm 101 on the 100 list, Barbara, every year." And she laughed, and I liked her. I said, "What are you trying to do, Barbara?" She said, "It's pretty simple, John. I want to make the 5 most common signs of mental illness as well known, and as widely known as the signs for heart attack or stroke. Now, I often don't have great ideas, but I know them when I hear them." I thought that was genius. I thought it was simple genius. She said to me, "John, you probably know the signs for heart attack or stroke." I said, "Actually, Barbara, I probably do." "Why do I know those?" She said, "Because those can happen to people we love. They're physical illnesses, and we don't want to lose those we love, so we've learned the signs, and now we call 911. I said, "Why don't I know the signs of mental illness?" She said, "Because people are ashamed of that, John. They've always been ashamed of it. No one wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to find it, because we wouldn't know what to do when we found it, other than conceal it." That would have been my life. She said, "Let me give you some statistics. half of all mental illness in America arises by age 14. Age 14. My son was 13. She said most people who are afflicted are the last to know it. That would have been true for my son. 2/3 of all mental illness arises by age 24. 2/3. Last year, she told me more people committed suicide in America, over 42,000 people. Fenway Park plus 5,000 people. Then died in every car accident all across the United States in that year. Every 90 minutes, she said, plus or minus, an American veteran, he or she, takes their own life. Every day, every week, every month, every year. I said, why don't I know that, Barbara? She said, because we don't talk about that. Makes everybody uncomfortable. I said, how can I help you? She said, can you start a steering committee in New Hampshire for this campaign? It's nationwide. We want to have the first statewide launch in New Hampshire. I had no idea if I could. And I said, let me see what I can do. Everybody I called, from the Attorney General, who I've known for years, to the head of safety, to the head of corrections, to the head of Health and Human Services, to hospital CEO, every single person I called said, how can I help? And more importantly, every single person I called told me a mental health story. Sometimes about their own family, sometimes about their extended family, sometimes about a friend or a coworker. Everyone had a story. And they would share them with me, because at that point I was non-judgmental. Everyone knew my story. So they knew I wouldn't be judging anyone. Broderick came up to New Hampshire a year ago in November to meet with the steering committee. Everyone loved her. She was just as impressive as you would hope. Annie Custer was in town. I said, Annie, could you meet with her? She called me next day. She said, John, I love that woman. I said, I do too, Annie, because if we allow it, we can help her save lives or change lives. We met again, the steering committee, in January, a year ago, January. And I had to tell everybody how much money we had to raise. Don't worry, I'm not asking for any money. How much money do we have to raise? So that was my assignment. I had no idea. So I picked a number that was sufficiently large to look like I gave a lot of thought, but doable if we got really lucky. So I said, we have to raise $150,000, like I knew what I was talking about. And the steering committee said, I think that's exactly right, which gave me no confidence, and I made it up. I thought, my gosh, these people have no idea what I did. So then we had to raise the money that I thought we should raise. And so I and others started going around. I've been the dean of the law school, and when you're the dean of a law school, they take out your blush gland. They take that right out, so you can ask for money without getting embarrassed. So my blush gland had been removed anyway, so I went around, started asking for money, and every single person I asked said, sure. First place I went, I wasn't working for Dartmouth then. I went to see Jim Weinstein, who was the CEO. He gave me money in 8 minutes. Then I went to Elliott Hospital, CMC, the New Hampshire Hospital Association gave me $40,000. Concord Hospital. It was the easiest money I ever raised. And everyone who gave me money told me a mental health story. Every one of them. Then I got to within 15,000 of the goal of 150 in no time. And then I called Governor Benson, who had made me Chief Justice. I didn't know Governor Benson when he nominated me. But I did get to know him a little bit after that, and I grew fond of him. We had a lot of private meetings, not talk about cases, just talk about life. So I called him and I said, Governor, I'm $15,000 short. This is the campaign. This is what I'm trying to do. And I know he gives away money for children. He's a very wealthy man, but he helps a lot of people. So I made my pitch. He said, how much do you need, John? I said, I'm $15,000 short. So he said, I'll send you a check. And he did. And then I wished I had told him I was $50,000, but I was 15. And so we raised 150. Since then, we'll raise about another 80 or 90. Easiest money I've ever raised in my lifetime. Then we had to launch this campaign. We launched it a year ago, May 23rd, almost a year to the day. May 23rd, 2016. nonpartisan, non-political public awareness campaign about mental illness. Not exactly Donald Trump speech. It was pretty boring in many ways, but it was important to me. So I said, well, where should we launch this? I want someone to know we're actually launching it. They said, you should launch it in the State House. I thought we'd do it in a corridor. I had no idea what they were talking about. They said, you should do it in the House chamber. And I said, well, is it a session day? Will the legislature be here? They said, no. I said, there are 400 seats in that House chamber. There aren't 400 people on a Monday morning at 10 o'clock. I said, well, you might be surprised. I was afraid we'd get 8 people. And we didn't get 400 people. We got 425 people. Monday morning, 10 a.m. a year ago. And I knew at that moment that we had touched a nerve. And my family wasn't the only family that had experienced that journey in mental health. It was the most impressive room I've been in a long time in this state. I lived here now almost 4 decades. The Catholic bishop who I'd never met, he was there. The Episcopal Church was there. Every member of our congressional delegation, our governor, who then was Maggie Hassan, the Attorney General, 3 members of the Supreme Court, hospital CEOs, business executives, families. It was amazing. Simply amazing. And Barbara Van Dalen got up that day and asked this question of that room in that beautiful chamber. She said, if there's anyone here this morning that has been untouched by mental illness, themselves, their family, their friends, their colleagues, if you've been untouched, raise your hand. Not one hand went up. Not a single hand went up. I said to her later, Barbara, how often does that happen? She said, it happens in almost every room where I asked the question. I said, Barbara, if that were a physical illness, it'd be a crisis in America. It'd be a White House press conference. It'd be a press conference at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. Because it's mental health, it's like, okay, not a problem. And then we waited to see if anyone would have an interest. As I said to you when I started, this is the 124th, 125th time I've been asked to speak. I've spoken at 35, 36, 37, maybe more, 40 high schools, all over the state. If you were with me on those days, you would have to be made of stone not to realize, folks, that we got a problem, and we can either start dealing with it or kick the can down the road and hope somebody will deal with it at some point. I was recently in Woodsville within the last week. That's a long trip, by the way. I haven't been up there. That's a long trip to Woodsville. And I got there, I was asked to speak at 1:45 in the afternoon. They got out at 3:05. It was 85 degrees, and I was in the gym. That's 50-foot ceilings, and the bleachers, you know, uncomfortable wooden bleachers. So 210 students, 20 staff, and yours truly, late in the afternoon. And so I thought, I don't know if this is going to go well. So I spoke for 35 minutes. This is a statement, this isn't about me. I spoke for 35 minutes. When I finished on this hot afternoon, 210 kids were standing and applauding. I spoke at Pembroke Academy one day, some months back. Peggy and I went. They told me there were 840 kids there. They were in both of those bleachers, both sides of the gym. I was speaking at one end of the gym with a microphone. I wasn't sure whether it worked or not. I finished speaking, wondering if they even heard me. 840 kids standing and applauding. I went to St. Paul's School, spoke to the student body, exact same experience. But what would break your heart is when it's over, kids come up to me. I must look like their grandfather. I'm only 45 years old, so I don't know why they would think that. Some might think I look older. And they look very young, which is also alarming, like your police chief. You should be 30 years older. So they look young, but they're suffering, these kids. And they'll have wet eyes and cracking voices, and they'll say to me, thank you for coming to my school. Thank you for talking about this. And I'll say to them, are you getting mental health counseling? Yes. He said, helping, yes. Are your classmates supportive? You know what they said to me? I can't tell my classmates. I wouldn't have any friends. It's 2017, folks. One little girl came up to me at Belmont High School after I spoke. She told me she was a freshman. She had the wet eyes, and she said, can I ask you a favor? I said, sure. She said, can I give you a hug? On that day, at that time, is there anything else I could have been doing more important than that? Sometimes these kids with the wet eyes, I'll say, you look like you could use a hug. Would you like a hug? Oh, I'd love a hug. And I hug them and they squeeze me like I'm a relative. And it's not right. It's not right. When I was recently at a high school up north, this will break your heart. So I waited, you know, kids come up 9 through 12. They had the 8th grade there too. So I finished. And the kids spoke to me as common. There was a little girl over here, she didn't want to even approach me. So I said to her, did you want to talk to me? And at this point, everyone's facing left. She and I were in the auditorium, it's kind of semi-dark. So we're sitting in the front row, and she said, she gave me her name, and she said, I'm 13 years old, and I'm in the 8th grade. And then without any hesitation to the stranger, because I won't judge her, she said to me, I have serious depression and anxiety. And I said, she had these big glasses, she was a button. I said, that's not easy, is it? She said, no, it's not. I said, are you getting help? She said, no, I am. I said, well, that's the good news, you know, you're 13 and there's so much help that's available. And getting help soon is really important. And let me tell you something else, you're not the only kid in this school, by the way, with those challenges. You may think you are, but you're not. I said, how's your treatment going? I said, well, I don't think the woman is right for me. And I said, well, then she's not right for you. So we need to find someone who is. I said, I think you should speak to your parents. Have you spoken to your parents? Yeah, she said, I spoke to my dad. I said, what did your father say? She said, he told me he didn't believe in mental health problems and I should just get over it. I wanted to say, did your father believe in the law of gravity? But I didn't. So I said, well, don't be too tough on your dad, because a lot of adults don't really understand it like you do. The important thing is you understand it. She said, I do. I said, so I want you to do me a favor. I said, is there a teacher here you like or a counselor? Yes, she said, there is, a woman. I said, good. You know what you're going to do? You're going to go see her today. I said, you promised me? She said, I promised you. I forget it. She was 13 years old. So then she said, well, what would I say? I said, this is what you're going to say. Remember this now. She said, okay. You tell the teacher that some crazy judge came to your school today and he ordered you to come see her and you had no choice. And she started laughing. She said, can I say that? I said, that's exactly what you're going to say. I hope she went. When I drove home that day, I thought, could I have been in a more important place today? I don't think so. When I was a kid, to this day, by the way, every illness from the neck down, every single one of them was treated with respect, compassion, and understanding. Every physical illness. From the neck up, not so sure. Maybe it's just you. Maybe if you were a stronger person, maybe if you were a better person, maybe if you just asked more of yourself, you wouldn't have these afflictions, because nobody seems to. That's what we got to change. A woman at St. Anselm College, spoke to her about a month ago, and I finished speaking. She raised her hand and she said, this says it all. She said, I'm 52 years old. I don't have a question, I just want to make a statement. She said, I had breast cancer when I was 48 years old, and my family was fabulous. My friends were wonderful. They took me to treatment, they made me meals, and my breast cancer is in remission, and I'm feeling so much better. And then about a year ago, she said, I was hit with serious depression. I never experienced that. Oh, she was so terrible. And all the people who were helping and hugging and cooking, they all stepped back. Even my family, she said. And now that cloud's starting to lift. Then she said, I would rather have breast cancer than depression. That's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. We need to change the culture. When I was a kid, one of my friends, his mother was sick, and really sick to me. So one day I came in from playing, I was maybe 11. My mother and I were in the kitchen, alone in the house, by the way. Let me just underscore that, alone in the house. So I'm in the kitchen with my mother, and I said, "Hey, Mom, what's wrong with Jimmy's mother? She doesn't look well." And my mother had a look on her face like, "Oh, I'm going to tell you something." And she bent over, and she whispered, "We're alone." She whispered, "She has cancer. She has cancer." Now, as a kid at 11, I thought, why are we whispering when we're alone? Maybe you can get cancer if you say, I had no idea why we're whispering. Some people in my childhood never said the word cancer. They said the C word. He or she has the C word. If you had the C word, you didn't tell your neighbors, your co-workers, your boss, your secret. My mother whispered it. When I was the same age, the only adult I ever heard say the word breast publicly was Hugh Hefner, Playboy magazine. True, 1954. He said the word breast. It was scandalous, he said it. So people whispered the word cancer. If they said cancer at all, they whispered it. And no one said the word breast. And some decades later, some very personal people said, let's put breast and cancer together, get a color, go to the town square with a megaphone and change the outcome for millions of women. That would have been impossible in the world of whispers that I grew up in. Last year, 300,000 women were diagnosed with breast cancer. Their outcomes are dramatically different because we stopped whispering and hiding. And it's all great. In the 80s, you might remember AIDS. Remember when AIDS? People were dying when we found out. It was frightening. Everyone seemed to be dying the day after they were diagnosed. Those people were stigmatized, quarantined. It was spooky. Maybe they're bad people. I don't know what's wrong with these people. And then Magic Johnson of the Los Angeles Lakers went to a bank of microphones October 1991 in California and said, I'm HIV. And then suddenly it was not only okay to have HIV, we love Magic, we had to find a cure if we could, or treatment. Overnight it changed. Magic Johnson just became president of the Lakers. He's very much with us. Mental illness has never had a Magic Johnson moment. And one of the reasons it hasn't is because of stigma. You all know that's true. And do you know what stigma is? Every one of us. I include myself. We're the people that are afraid of those kids with the wet eyes. They're afraid of us. We're going to judge them. And they might be right, too. They might be right. I spoke to a business group a while ago. A guy raised his hand and said, how do I know if your 5 Signs campaign is working? I said, what's your name, Bob? What's your name? He said, my name is Bob. I said, this is how you know. If you were my supervisor, Bob, I would come to you today and say, Bob, my back was killing me. I don't know what I've done. I could have a disc on. I'm in such pain. So I won't be in tomorrow, and I'm going to see a doctor. It's an emergency visit. I have to go. You know what you'd say to me, Bob? Good luck with that, John. Let me know how you're doing. But I won't come to you, Bob, and say, Bob, you know, I've been crying at home. I thought people think I may have serious depression. I don't know, but I'm going to see a psychiatrist tomorrow. I said, do you hear those both as health problems, Bob? He smiled. I said, when you do, we won't need this campaign. But now we need it, because I know you don't hear those the same. It won't change unless people decide it's time. These kids who are standing and applauding in gyms and auditoriums, they want to talk about it, but we've taught them not to. Little boy at Bishop Brady High School saw our little 5 Signs card. Teacher put it on her classroom door. She sent an email, that's all I know. And the second day of high school, he was a freshman, so he'd been in her class for basically a day, he didn't know her. He waited for every student to leave the classroom, because we taught him that. He learned well, by the way. So then he went up to her and he said, I saw your card. Does that mean this school will be more understanding of kids with mental health problems? She said, well, I think we need to be. I think we need to talk about it, normalize it. He said, great, because I have a mental health problem. You know, I take medications and I feel so much better, but there are still circumstances where would you be willing to come with me and we'll talk to my other teachers? And she said, sure. This cost 4 cents. Does anyone think that kid, his second day of high school, would have gone up to a teacher of all people he didn't know and confessed something he's been taught to hide? I don't. 4 cents. We've given out 400,000 of these, by the way, in New Hampshire. I don't mean drop them from an airplane, I mean given them out. The head of the school administrators asked me for 200,000 of these. I said, what are you gonna do with those? He said, I thought you wanted one on every refrigerator. I said, I do. He said, well, I'm gonna give them away. We have 180,000 kids in public schools. We'll give them to kids and teachers and administrators. The Catholic bishop, who I've still never met, and the Episcopal bishop, who I did meet, wrote personal letters to their own ministers and priests about this campaign. That almost never happens. Prince Harry has helped this campaign. He did a video some months back, it's a 1-minute video about this. And at the time, everyone thought he was doing that because Princess Diana had been depressed. And actually, no one talked about that when she was living. Well, it was true, but he also disclosed a few weeks back that he, Prince Harry, suffers depression. That takes courage, by the way. If you're a member of the royal family, that's close to a Magic Johnson moment. Let me close with this. When I go around the state, I talk about changing the culture, right? And people say it's hard to change the culture. Well, it is if you make it hard. My sister and I, every Thursday night, used to get in my father's Impala. My mother and father would jump in the front seat, we'd jump in the back seat. We'd drive 2 miles downtown in my town and have dinner every Thursday. I didn't know why it was Thursday. Now I know my dad got paid on Thursday, so he must have felt flush. And by the way, that car that we sat in had no seatbelts, so they must not have been important at that time. And we went to a restaurant, same restaurant, and every table in that restaurant had an ashtray. Every single table. Some of them had 2 ashtrays. And at some point during the evening, everyone in that restaurant was smoking. My mother and father worshiped my sister and myself as they blew smoke at us. And so after 2 hours in a smoke-filled chamber disguised as a restaurant, we would leave. And we'd get back in that big blue Impala and drive 2 miles home. And I learned as a kid that if you smoke, 2 miles is apparently a long trip. So my mother and father would do, they'd crack the window filter system, so they would crack the window and light up. And if you're sitting in the back seat, all that meant was the smoke's coming back at you. But I never said that to my mother. I thought she'd be upset if she knew that. And then we got home, and every room in my house had an ashtray, except my bedroom and my sister's bedroom. My sister made ashtrays at summer camp. They were like heirlooms in my family. Find an ashtray today. Did you find one? They don't even come in your car anymore. If you smoke outside on the Boston Common, you violate a city ordinance. If you would ask that kid one night at that smoke-filled restaurant, do you think in your lifetime ashtrays will be hard to find? I would say ashtrays are always going to be here. I'll be smoking probably. Are you kidding me? Ashtrays are away? That same kid used to watch the nightly news, and when I go to high schools and I tell kids this, they look at me like, how old is this guy? So I said we had a black and white television in my house, had 3 channels and rabbit ears. I do remember that. It worked fine, by the way. And at midnight, it went off the air. That's it. There was no TV after 12 o'clock. They had the test pattern on the screen. And they look at me like, oh my God. But I said to them, I used to watch the news. It was 15 minutes long then. It still is. I just squeezed it into 30 minutes now. But it was 15 minutes of news. And some nights I would see African Americans being attacked by police dogs, billy club police officers. And as a child, really at any age, but as a kid, it was really frightening to me. And I remember saying to my mother, where is that happening? She wasn't very proud of it. And she would say, it's happening in the United States. Which I couldn't imagine. If you would ask that kid on one of those nights, do you think in your lifetime will have an African-American president of the United States. I would have said, ashtrays will disappear before that happens, and then never disappear. The answer is no, not possible. Thank you, Barack Obama. I never met the president. I was Chief Justice when he was elected, and my mother had passed, but her voice remained. And my mother would say to me, "You better be down there. This is history." And so I bought a ticket, and I flew to Washington, D.C., and I stood on the mall with 1.3 million of my closest friends on that cold January day. And I had a great location on the mall, because where I was standing, Barack Obama was about 2 inches tall. I was 3 football fields away from Barack Obama. But I at least knew the voice by then. I heard the oath, and I witnessed it. But mostly I watched it on the Jumbotron, where Barack Obama was 15 feet tall. And as I stood there that morning and watching it, in the stillness around me, everyone was just quiet. I was thinking of my mother and thinking that which was impossible in her lifetime, and that which what I thought was impossible in my own, was not part of the history of fabric of the United States. If we can eliminate ashtrays in the culture I grew up in, if we can elect an African-American president in the racism that permeated my childhood, we can change the culture around mental illness. You don't have to spend a dime. You don't have to go to a march. You don't have to raise $1. You don't have to risk arrest. You don't even have to buy an airline ticket. You just have to learn and be bold enough, strong enough, courageous enough to start talking about it. That's how change happens. When I spoke at St. Paul's School that morning, 8 kids got up when I finished, current students talking to their classmates. I had no idea what they were going to say. And those 8 kids told their classmates about their own mental health issues. I had never seen anything that brave before. Chuck Morse, the Senate President, I spoke at an event last September. He came, followed me. It had nothing to do with why I was there. He was going to give an award away. It was a public room. The Salem newspaper was there to cover him. And he said, "Judge Broderick told you how bad Danvers was. I know how bad it was, since my father was an inpatient there 10 weeks of every year of my childhood." I said to him later on, "Thanks, Senator, for saying that. That's how change happens." People need to know they're not alone. And they're not alone. The world I grew up in, every house on my street was perfect. Everybody in those houses had a perfect life. Everyone was doing just right. That's not true, by the way. And when it comes to mental illness, it's especially not true. So we can decide, as I say when I speak, you can come here at night and say, "Well, that guy had an interesting story, but thank God it's not going to affect me." And maybe someday somebody else will take the initiative and will change it. I hope you don't do that. Your call. It's not what I think. It's what you think. And so that I'm not too righteous about it, if my family story had been pretty much below the radar, trust me, I wouldn't be here. People say, "Oh, you're so courageous to talk about it." No, I'm not. I wouldn't have talked about it. But I didn't have a way to turn a lot of pain into a lot of purpose until this campaign, and now I do. If my son said to me, "Dad, stop talking about it," I wouldn't be here now. You know, my son says, "Dad, I'm proud you're doing it." Every person with a mental illness, he said, has 2 things in common. Number 1, they didn't ask for it. And number 2, they don't deserve it. You know who the largest providers of mental health services are in America? Jails and prisons. That seemed like a good model. We need to find it. We need to treat it. We need to learn about it, and we need to have the courage to talk about it. If some stranger walked in here right now limping, almost everyone in the room would be standing up saying, "Can I help you? Do you need a chair? Did you fall? Can I call?" If somebody came in here now and sat down and they were crying, it's their privacy. Well, we should be saying, "You okay?" We're afraid to say that. would be conditioned not to say. My son said to me, Dad, when I was 15 years old, if I saw that card, I said, my God, that's how I feel. I didn't know I had a health problem. His palms were sweaty, he told me, every day in high school. I said, why didn't you say something? He said, well, but I told you, Dad, I was shy. I didn't know I had a health problem. So, my request is simple. We have these out there, take them. Put them on your refrigerator. If you want more, we don't have them. Peggy's here. If you give her a snail mail address, we'll mail them to you. There's no charge. If we're going to change the culture, we have to change the culture. And I guarantee you, if you do, you are going to benefit some child, some neighbor, some relative, someone you're never going to know. Because I say, thank God at some point people stood up. 1955, if you were gay, tell no one. Now we have gay marriage. We have weddings. And that's great. We've come nowhere that distance with mental illness. It's so shameful. And we got to change it. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. You've been very attentive, I appreciate that. Thanks to the chief for inviting me.
Thank you very much.